For more on the efforts to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza, we're joined live by Fatuma Shideh, who's the Oxfam Canada's humanitarian manager. Fatuma, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We know that this new aid deal is going to involve a lot, the ceasefire includes an aid deal, but there was some complications at the border with getting it in. Walk us through how much aid has been able to get in, if it's enough, if we're finally past October 7th levels or pre-October 7th levels, and how much more we can expect to get in over the last day of the ceasefire.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so the aid has been, since October 7th, has been really a drop in the ocean. That is humanitarian actors really looking at the level and scale of devastation that we're seeing in Gaza, that 2 million people really have been under severe bombardment over the past 7 weeks, facing shortages of food, water, fuel. There has been aid coming in through Rafah crossing. We have heard since Friday, for example, 200 trucks were let in, but I think it's important to really set the context that before October 7th, almost 500 trucks per minimum were being allowed in through Rafah crossing. So 200 trucks is a drop in the ocean. Yes, we are hearing fuel, which has been quite critical. 120,000 liters have been let in. However, the UN has even noted that they need at least 160,000 liters just to sustain basic operations. So the flow, yes, as part of this pause, is welcome for increasing of humanitarian aid, but really it is just a Band-Aid, and that really, once we are in day 3 of this pause, and it has been quite clear, I think, from the Israeli forces of their intentions afterwards. So this is just a Band-Aid on really a bleeding wound that will be let off as of tomorrow, really, in the next few days.
Has your group or any other groups received confirmation from the Israeli government around what the aid situation will be like after the ceasefire is over? Like you said, 24 hours time, it'll be done. Are we going to still be seeing the same amount of trucks moving in? Will the flow of fuel stop?
So there's a lot of uncertainty around it. We are hearing, yes, that the flow, I think the intention is to kind of increase that flow over this 4 days. However, given the fact that it is really a fragile pause in ceasefire, there's just a lot of gray and uncertainty around that as to what will be let in. Also noting that really this is the first time that the north of Gaza is able to receive aid. So we've heard as of yesterday, for example, 68 trucks were received in the north, and this is since October 7th. So they're looking at really the scale of humanitarian disaster and the human suffering that we're talking about, communities that haven't had access to clean water since really October 7th, food that at this point we were hearing that, entire food stocks that stores were empty. And it's also important to note things like shelter. So even, yes, aid arriving to communities in the north is slow, but even communities in the south that were quote unquote supposed to be safe zones are living in overcrowded shelters, and that for them as well, there is grave risks of dehydration, starvation, as well as just increase of the spread of disease. So I think our broader messaging here is, yes, this pause is welcome, but really it is woefully inadequate, especially given how fragile it is, and knowing that after this pause ends, that there are clear intentions to continue this heavy bombardment, unfortunately, on the people of Gaza.
And Fatuma, talk to me a little bit more about the distribution of this aid. We know weather conditions are getting colder. It's wet season now in Gaza. So paint a picture of what the relief is like there now.
Yeah, so we are hearing that, yes, these aid trucks have been coming in, carrying very critical supplies. So food, blankets, like you mentioned, winter is coming, and that communities, whether they're in the north or south, are living in very overcrowded conditions. Over 50% of homes have been damaged in Gaza. So really all the communities that have been forcibly displaced are living in very poor conditions. Winter is coming, so things like blankets, food, cooking oil. So we are seeing huge queues of communities trying to now access cooking oil. At this point, this 4-day pause has allowed time for families to come back together, to reunite, to unfortunately bury their killed, their loved ones, but also be able to stock up. That unfortunately, given that it is such a fragile and short pause, that communities are now trying to access things like cooking oil, blankets, key kind of resources to allow them to sustain life at this point. And again, these are the queues that we're seeing for communities to access this aid are incredibly long. And the sad reality is that a lot of people will not be able to access it.
Talking a little bit more about the distribution of the aid, we've heard a lot about the lack of safety for not only people in the South and the West Bank, places that are supposed to be deemed safe by the IDF, but also for aid workers as well. What are you hearing on the ground during this pause? Has more work been able to be done as this temporary pause has continued?
I mean, I think really the one thing that all aid workers that we were hopeful for is that, yes, the level of aid could increase because the needs were just, I mean, we've never seen a scale in terms of this disaster and the level of needs that, yes, more aid was being allowed in. But the reality is that for a humanitarian operation and distribution to scale up, 4 days is not sufficient. We're not even talking about days or weeks. This is months of really trying to be able to reach those who are affected. So in terms of safety and distribution, yes, we are hearing that even in the north, for example, that some of the trucks were facing difficulty to cross. They have crossed into the north, but that I think there is a lot of uncertainty and hesitancy from humanitarian workers, given that this pause is quite fragile, and that it's really a race against time. And unfortunately, all people who have been affected will not be able to be reached.
All right, a lot of important insights there. Fatuma Shideh, who is with the Oxfam Canada's Humanitarian Manager. Thank you.
Thank you so much.